it is Lydia who exists, and today we are doing another episode of Liddy with Lydia. This is the new series I've begun on this channel where I review and reflect upon literature that I read. Get it? Liddy? Like literature with Lydia. And today we're going to be going over a book that I recently read and finished actually today called Into the Wild, and it's very famous, and so I'm sure you've heard of it. And if you haven't, it's pretty heartbreaking. It's a true story about, it's an investigative journalism piece about a boy, really, who after college, because of feeling like trapped his whole life and like unable to truly express his inner self in a way that feels free to him, and then feeling like he was like pushed into going to college, he goes out and decides to live like in nature, and not just in nature. Before he lives in nature, he lives like an impoverished, simple life, squatting in abandoned places, hitching rides from people, going to like fringe communities, and basically just like exploring the land as if it was a different time, as if he was a pioneer. I really think that this book is super freaking interesting because he reminds me of me. The main character reminds me a lot of me. The main character as in like this human being who existed. I've always felt a little like undomesticatable, and I've always felt like the systems that exist don't nurture parts of me that I've always felt like were wild and like needed to be nurtured, or at least like attempted to be understood. I guess I've just kind of felt restless and like intensely avoidant of demands put upon me my entire life. And although I've never taken it to this extreme that he has, where he just like completely cuts contact with his entire family and like runs off into the woods and ends up getting into a lot of trouble and like actually dying, I've never taken it to that extreme, but I have so many of the similar tendencies that he does, like feeling suffocated by relationships, like having an extreme desire to be self-sufficient, and having like an extreme desire to isolate and figure out like what life is about on my own terms. I've experienced many phases of becoming more and more independent and isolated, and sometimes it's been good for me and sometimes it has been bad for me, and I've learned a lot, and I think I'm just lucky that in my quest to detach from society, I've managed to come out of it alive and safe, because there have been dangerous situations that I put myself in, and he has also put himself in dangerous situations recklessly, carelessly, as if it's the only way to do it. And like admittedly, I have put myself in dangerous situations as well, and pretty recklessly and without doing my research ahead of time too, but just different. Like, I think for me, I've never put myself out in the wild alone, and that might be the difference between being a man and being a woman, is that women don't really think about that, but I have definitely put myself out in the wild in many, many other ways, and isolated severely, and really like I feel like I've harbored a lot of resentment for the life that I've lost, living in what feels like captivity. School has always felt like captivity to me. The one aspect I really appreciated about it was the social aspect, and I think that's what maybe differentiates me from the main character of this book, which is a true human being named Chris, is that he had this like desire to truly be alone, and while I have a desire to be alone, I think I also have accepted that I can't be alone, that it's impossible to not rely on other people at all. It really is, and I'm not sure when I came to that realization, but there was a long period when I was so determined to not. But there's just really, in this society, like, we're such a social species, there's really no way to survive without other people. And to be honest, I've also come to the conclusion that, like, why would you want to? Also, as he writes eventually in one of his last journal entries ever, people are what make life worth living. Like, an experience isn't real unless it's shared with another person. He wrote that, and then he was gonna head back into society, and he ended up just like dying. So it is true though that people are what make reality real. And like, an experience you have alone, it's still an experience, and it's important. And like, a lot of meaningful things happen with me, myself, and I alone. But also, there is something incredibly special about being seen by another person. And I do feel lucky that I've come to realize that before I completely like cut myself off from society and gave up on having any interdependency with society. So that being said, let's get into it. So just like the moment that I started reading this book, I got this deep, dark feeling because when I was a kid, I walked into my parents watching the movie that was made about this book, and it was one of the most horrifying experiences ever. And the fact that they told me it was a real story, it was so horrible. I was so terrified and traumatized. And just like from the moment I started reading this book, the way that I knew how it ended, it's like, that's such a dark way for it to end. And the way that the scene that I saw when I walked in was like, I saw the scene of him burning money, and I was so confused, and I was like, why guys, why? And the answer that my dad had was because he's just being stupid. Like, that was the answer that my dad had. And I was like, no, but why? And it's so weird because like in this book, they like explore the character of this human being a lot, and like one of the main things that he always does is like, he can't seem to settle on an answer unless it makes sense to him, and so he's always asking why. And I think, to be honest, like as I was learning about him, he's like pretty eccentric and pretty like detail oriented in a way that makes me think he must have been neurodiverse. He must have been. He was like obsessed with the truth and he was so determined, like in a way that is like existential in nature. Yeah, it's just like weird because like the one thing I kept asking my dad about this movie was why? Why did he do that? And like, I wasn't happy with that answer, and like Chris is not happy with that answer either. He's unsettled by the question, especially like, why do people do bad things? And like, that is something that in my own personal life I have researched so much because it does bother me so badly. And like, no matter how much I think about it, I still can't really come to a firm answer except for that they do. And there's lots of reasons you could say why, but at the end of the day, it's just a choice that people make. I can just like so heavily relate to him that he was like, he hates society and rejects society because he's driven away from society because of the way that it wrongs people. And they describe how he has like everything. He's smart, and he's kind, and he's beautiful, and people like flock to him, and he's motivated. But he rejects society, not because it rejects him, but because it rejects other humans who don't deserve to be rejected in his eyes. He's a good person, and it bothers him that things are the way that they are. In this book, he goes to college because his parents want him to go to college and like kind of guilt him into going to college. And I can super deeply relate to that because my whole life it's never been acceptable for me to not go to college. And I did end up going to college, and then I ended up leaving college. And it was something about like, I just couldn't accept that someone else had decided that for me. I just really didn't appreciate that someone else had decided that for me. And like when I look back on it, I do resent that time that I spent my life like for 3 years in a place I didn't really want to be, but I was because I felt like I had a duty to serve to someone who made me feel like I didn't really have a different option. Something I was thinking about while I was reading this book was that there is a reason that we have society, and that I'm actually like pretty grateful for what it's done. And especially like when he was talking about like how difficult it was for Chris / Alex, because he goes by both names, to hunt and kill things. And I'm just like realizing like I don't want to hunt and kill things. I'm really happy that we have the systems in place that we have for me to not starve and not have to think about food all day every day. Like there's something beautiful and mindful about having to think about food all day every day, but it's also like harsh and really rough. And like I'm happy that I get to sit and make art. I'm happy that I get to write. Like I'm happy that I get to think about more than hunger. So he hangs out with a lot of like homeless people and like fringe people, and I remember there's this time when I was living in my car and it was rough, like it was actually difficult. And I met these people once when I was at a cafe, and they were like begging for money in front, and I remember I got them food, and then they like, we started visiting with each other, and they like started to tell me about like where they were living, and it was like at this camp, and they had been like traveling for years, they said, traveling on foot for years. And it was like they were mixed between like travelers and homeless people, and it was like fringe people, that's what I would call them, just people who don't really live in homes, people who travel, people who are free, they're nomadic, they're like more connected with older generations of people, and they're less domestic. And it's kind of interesting because you get this like fearful feeling like these people are kind of wild, aren't they? And like you don't really know who you can and can't trust. But I guess the thing with Chris is that he wasn't traveling with much, so there wasn't much to trust people with, and then he also was not a woman, so there was even less that could be done to him. He literally had like nothing pretty much the whole time he was traveling. I got the feeling to avoid these people, and it's like to a certain extent like I've wanted to be free and nomadic, but then also like I may be undomestic, but I'm also domestic. I got this feeling like I was different than these people and to avoid them. And like they invited me back to their campsite, and I was just like, I think y'all are like living a rougher life than me, and like maybe I am a little pampered. Like I may live in my car, but it's like got cute covers and like like in a memory foam mattress, and like I spend my days at cafes and libraries. Like I'm obviously enjoying the benefits of being in society, and it is like to a certain extent I am domestic, to a certain extent I am not domestic, and it is like I am teetering between these two worlds. And that's kind of like with sociopathic people too. I'm not antisocial, but I'm not neurotypical. I'm very much like my own little niche. I like to find other people who are living in the same realm as me, but sometimes it is difficult because sometimes I do feel like I'm in my own little realm. Something I was thinking about when I was reading this was how they talk about how disorganized attachment kids will attach to other people other than their caretakers because their caretaker is not a safe base for them. And so they'll be like really friendly with strangers. They talk about how he's just like so friendly and talkative with strangers, like he's not a recluse. And that's why I do kind of feel like I relate to him, because like I like people, I just don't always want to be around people. I like them and I get along with them and I can talk with them, but I don't always want to be around them. And sometimes I want to be alone for a very long time. But yeah, they talk about how he's so like loving to strangers and he's just like a loving person, but then he didn't talk to his family at all. He cut ties with all of his family. And I just so deeply relate to this because I feel like that's me. That literally is me. As I was reading this, just thing after thing after thing that they were saying, that they were describing about him, I was like, this is me. He's me. Like, we get each other. Like, even down to the foraging of food. Like, I want to live off the land because can you imagine not having to rely on other people to feed yourself? How amazing would that be? And that's like a sign of like looking for parental guidance outside of your parents. When you don't attach properly to your parents, suddenly the whole world kind of seems like your parent. It seems like it's up to the world to raise you all of a sudden. And that's why people with disorganized attachments are frequently like, it would be nice to everybody because everybody's a chance to be provided for and connected with. I didn't get it at home, but I could get it elsewhere. Or I didn't get it reliably at home, at least. There was this thing that I started doing at a certain point in my life where like I would talk to myself, and I consider it like emotional regulation. Like I feel like I developed the capacity to emotionally regulate. And something that will happen now though is like when I talk to myself, I'll have a question for like a month, and like it goes on and it goes on and it goes on. And I don't really let it go because it keeps coming back. And if I don't get to the root of it, like to the very, very end of it, then we just keep going. I talk about in this book how he couldn't move on from projects until he got the one thing right, so he was like very present with projects and very present with problems and very like mindful and in the moment with them, and he liked to work them the whole way through. He was a very smart person, but people said he was too smart for his own good and he thought too much for his own good. Y'all hear that? I feel like in a way, like the fact that he thought so much, he had to counteract that with being in his body. And that's like what sent him on this giant journey. This giant journey! Something that I was realizing as I was reading this book was how tough pioneer people must have been. And like explorers and native people of America and native people of everywhere. Like our ancestors were freaking tough. Like how are we still alive is what I'm wondering. It's just kind of a miracle. Because like living off the land is ridiculously difficult. There's a reason so many people died. Something I have been realizing recently and that this book reminded me of is that you can rely on people a lot more than you think you can to survive. Like, if what you're trying to do is to be okay, a lot of people will help you and look after you. I think it's super interesting. Every time that he would like go into a town, if he had something he didn't want to get stolen, he would dig a hole and bury it and then come back for it. So much so that they, after he died, would find his stuff buried places. And even his car, like, he drove it off of the road and then it got stuck in a flooded place and he just decided to leave his car behind. And he was just like, okay, well I'm probably better off on foot anyway. Can you imagine wanting to be free so bad that even your car is seen as a burden? Even the capacity to move hundreds of miles at a time is seen as a burden? And then you just start hitchhiking with people? They ended up finding his car later and it was in pretty good condition, and they ended up using it. Like the state park troopers that it was found in started to use his car as like a reliable transportation for the state park. So he gets a job at one point at McDonald's or a burger place, and they just, when this like interviewer who was writing the story goes back to ask about like what he was like, they just said he was really weird and like talked about trees all the time and like didn't really talk to anyone. And then he later found out it was because he was living in a trailer and squatting and he didn't want people to know. But I thought that was very interesting that he just talks about trees all the time, because I literally walk around and think about trees all the time, and I think about how like we're so similar to trees. Like But time is the tree rings, and like things that happened in the past, the reason it feels like we keep revisiting them is because it's like a new deposit on top of the past. It's like new growth. It's like a new tree ring. The new tree ring is on top of the old tree ring, and that's why we think about things that happened in the past. And it's just like, when they were like, he talks weird about trees, that's literally all he did. I was like, okay, yeah. What? He's autistic and spiritual. Like, he's running from his past. Like, he's traumatized. I like almost found myself falling in love with him, to be honest. I was like, I don't know you, but I feel like I am you. I have this thing called pathological demand avoidance, and it's been my whole life. Everybody said I'm really stubborn, and like if someone tells me what to do, I don't want to do it. And it comes from a place of believing that like, I don't think you should tell me what to do. I don't really think that that's right for you to do, so why would I do what you're telling me to do when it's kind of wrong that you're telling me what to do to begin with? You know what I'm saying? He always wanted to do things his way and would drown out people trying to give him instruction. And I don't even think that's what killed him. I think what killed him was an accident. Well, I guess him not taking advice did kind of lead to his death, but did a lot of things. It wasn't just that. I'd say he had a lot of complexes. And I think it's just like, at the end of the day, it comes down to not wanting to be told what to do in any capacity and having a whole lifetime of resentment build up around the fact that he had all these things he wanted to do and he had to spend so much time like institutionalized, because that's what school is. It's an institution. We're put in that for 8 hours a day because our parents need to go to work and work. Like, and then after that he had to go to college because he was deeply encouraged by his parents to go to college. It's like, that wasn't what was for him. That isn't what is for some people. And it's important that you listen to people when they say they know what they want for themselves, and it's not that. I don't understand when people think that they know better for other people. I trust that if you don't want to go to college, it's because you know that that's not for you. You know your path, and if that's not your path, then it's not that. Because I am spiritual, I do feel as if people know their own path, and to be honest, I do think that this whole book is a very spiritual book. It's a journey. It's him trying to find meaning in the world. And it's just really sad the way that it ends. Sometimes I do feel like what is missing in the society is like a conscious awareness of spiritual realities. And something that I think that this book taught me is that like it's nobody else's place to tell you what your journey is or how your journey is going to go, and that everybody does actually have their own journey and they have their own destiny, and to interfere with that is to really kind of fuck with good things. It's really kind of not a good thing to mess with other people's paths. To pressure someone to do something, I think, is not holy. That's how I feel. I think it's so interesting that he loved books and he read books and then he became the type of book that he loved. And I think maybe in the afterlife, he has some sway over like what his story did, like how far it took off. It spread far and wide. What did he love more than a good story? What did he love more than a hero's journey? What did he love more than a true story of a journey? Probably his sister. They talk about how he would like seemingly store up on social interaction. So like he would interact with people in a really intense way and like be truly like present with them as well, which I don't know how else to interact with people if I'm being honest. And then would like kind of save up on those interactions and like be able to be alone for a long time. And I went to a party recently with someone and it was an amazing party. Like there was a lot that happened and it was really fun. I'm glad that I got invited and that I brought this person with me too. And on our way back I was like, wow, that's really gonna like last me for so long. And like I began to run through it in my head and like I haven't stopped running through it in my head. It's just like there's layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of things and enrichment that I get from interacting with people, especially in like group environments. It's one of my favorite things to just witness a big group event, because there's so many things that happen. Literally, like, I'm eating it like a snake. Like, I'm digesting it slowly, and like I keep learning from it, and I keep gaining like metaphorical nutrients from the experience long after it happens. And I do think he probably shared that with me, because it's not really like a normal characteristic to be able to be alone for months and months and months at a time, and just like still feel the echoes of people there, so you don't really even feel lonely. But that is something that I do, and it might come from like trauma and like having developed the capacity to have flashbacks, and therefore you can have very realistic feeling like memories as well, because it's encoded in your brain already to like experience things again and again and again. And for me, that happens even with the positive things, which I think is maybe a gift of having a very visual brain, a very experiential brain. The author of this book talks about how Chris would like shirk all duty that was to connect to other people, because he had spent so many of his years feeling like he owed his family. When someone would be like, oh, trying to mother him, being like, oh, you need to like be careful, you need to watch out for yourself, you need to have more money than this, you need to wear better shoes, you need to put these things in your bag, he would really like kind of respond passive aggressively to it. Not passive aggressive, but like it would feel invasive to him, and he would like politely accept, but then like leave the things that they gave him behind, which I totally relate to. If someone keeps giving you something that you don't want, you just take it and then you leave it somewhere. But he too finds like mothering and parenting invasive, and I can find it like, it almost feels like codependency to me. It's like, why do you care so much? You barely know me. That's how it feels when people care about me. Like, what are you doing? Like, when you have an enmeshed relationship with your parents as a kid, when you grow up, the last thing you want is another parent-kid relationship. Even if it's not like an enmeshed relationship, it's like if someone's trying to parent you, it does feel like invasive because your parents were so invasive. I think part of the rejection of society that some people experience is like, if this is a society and a structure and a system that could let me and other people like me get so badly hurt and neglected and or pushed into things that we don't want to be pushed into, then what's the point of the society even? Like, what good does it do? And as I was thinking about this and like relating to his standpoint, I also like came across the thought that I have sometimes, which is that society is in a process of evolving to become something different all the time. And I think that when you spot and experience a hole in the way that society takes care of its people, it's like you who has experienced that gap in how society takes care of people, who knows the best how to fill the gap. And the sad part about this is that I think at the end of Chris's journey, when he was truly like isolated, he was ready to go home, and he wrote in his journal that he was like ready to go be someone in the countryside who does good things for people who aren't accustomed to having good things done for them. That was his mission. That was his like hole that he was gonna go fill. It's pretty sad because he probably would have done an amazing job of that, and he would have had like a really beautiful impact on people's lives. And he still is having beautiful impacts on people's lives. Like, this book is bringing profundity and understanding and curiosity into people's lives. And so he is still having like a really profound impact on society to this day. But I guess what I've come to believe is that like if you have spotted a hole in society where people are not taken care of, and instead of getting jaded, which it's hard to not, but instead of getting jaded, it's usually best to try to fill the hole in whatever way you can. And the thing is, like, society is going to go on and on and on, and you're not the only one experiencing that gap. You're you're not the only one trying to close it. They work like cells in a body. Like, maybe you can't heal the whole body, but you can do your piece to heal the body. You can contribute in the way that you can contribute. And that's all you can do at the end of the day. And even if the system is broken, maybe it won't be one day. Maybe it won't be, especially in that one way. Maybe it'll be broken in a different way, but in that one way, maybe it won't be one day. And you'll have had something to do with that, and that will be a beautiful thing to have left behind. Something that I kept thinking as I was reading this book was that I think that Chris/Alex was using isolation as self-harm and like wilderness as self-harm. Like, it felt like he had this like aggression and he didn't know how to get it out, and it was just like pent up. And it's like some people, when they have overwhelming emotions and overwhelming sadness and overwhelming empathy, which I think he did, he was just like a truly like intensely feeling person. Sometimes when you're experiencing overwhelming sadness, you don't know how to get it out, and I think he was just like running to the ends of the earth trying to get this like antsiness and this like frustration out of his system, this feeling that something was wrong that like followed him. And it's like common for people who survive trauma to self-harm, and I think that his form of self-harm was like isolation, wilderness. A word that I've been thinking about recently, even before I started reading this book, was the word yuppie. And I like think of it as someone who's like a sellout, or like is in certain parts of society are like less than ethical, doing less than ethical things for like a big paycheck. And I think that he like has a similar thought process when it comes to like he was talking about Greek life and how it really bothered him, how much resources was being put into something that ultimately he found frivolous and like shallow and unimportant. And I can relate to that a lot. But at the end of the day, like sometimes I realize like I'm thinking, oh, this is like really kind of interesting. Sometimes I realize I'm thinking too hard about things, and that like part of being an animal and being alive is like being an animal and being alive. And like another spiritual lesson that I've gotten from life and is like relevant to this book as well is that like you don't always have to think about things so hard, and things aren't always meant to be thought about so hard either. Like there's a time and a place when realizations will arrive at your feet, and those ones are like the ones you're meant to pick up and like do something with. Maybe this is like a little bit of a lesson for myself at this very moment, to not like have to dig so hard for things. Sometimes things just come to you. So I kind of get like my urge to explore out by walking, and I'll go on these like things called spirit walks where it's just kind of like an intuitively led walk. Yeah, sometimes those are really long and they just feel so good because it's like I connect to something very primal. Walking connects you to a very like ancient part of your brain. It feels really good. Walking to this extent, I have never felt the desire to do. To the extent that he walked all over the country. He hiked no man's land. He hiked the wilderness. He hiked some dangerous places, some cold places. And I just have no desire to do that, and that makes me a little more domestic, and that's okay because I really want to live. I want to keep living, and I'm really grateful I get to. I'm a really sensitive person as well, and the way that we were talking about like how people who feel a lot and are in the society, they tend to like be able to like experience other people's pain on a very visceral level, as in like it's attached to them. They're empathetic, they're empaths, they can feel other people's pain. And there's a lot of pain in this society and on this planet. Not just human pain either, it's like animal pain and plant pain. And so I think some of the ways that I like express that overwhelming frustration and confusion is like I also am in touch with hunger. Like I'm very in touch with hunger, and I may not go out into the woods and only eat what the land has to offer, but I am intentionally hungry quite frequently. That's always been like that. Well, it's not always been like that. It started when I was like 16. I was in a lot of pain, and like being hungry kind of felt like it made sense because it was painful. Hello, and we are back. It is another day. I was just feeling like tired yesterday, so we're back. You didn't even know that I left. I didn't even have to tell you. I took a break, so if the tone is different, it's because I took a break. That's how breaks work. People who survive odd chances over and over and over, they begin to see their survival as evidence of the fact that like God is watching after them, and they begin to like do more risky things with the intent that they'll have like more run-ins with God. And I have always found that interesting because personally I feel like my childhood did not appear from the outside like it was like distressing or wrought with like odd chances of survival, but I was like living in fight or flight mode. I always felt like I was gonna die. It's so much anxiety growing up, which I think does like contribute to the way that my brain has developed, and like the fact that I have CPTSD now, and I'm pretty sure that Chris/Alex does as well. Changing names is something I see a lot in people who have CPTSD. It's like they want to leave behind an old version of them, like the hurt version of them, and they want to reinvent themselves as someone who is new and impenetrable. They want to begin again, basically. And like I myself have found like the desire to separate like my outwards facing self from my inwards self, just so that there's like some space between me and other people, so that I have like something that's for me. But I thought that was really interesting because like he also has changed his name in the desire to just leave his past behind. A lot of his connection that he finds in this book, and when I say book, I do mean in his life, but also in the way that he is portrayed by the author of this book, is through writing and through reading. And like a lot of his idols are writers, and to me it's evident that like he was a writer. He was a writer, and like I think he was meant to be a writer. And sometimes when you can't speak about things that have happened to you, what you end up doing is like becoming incredibly prolific and speaking about things that happen at large, but it's always like a reflection of something that you have experienced personally, and it's always like a quest for you to find out more about what happened to you by finding out what's happening in the world and by discussing what's happening in the world. You know what I mean? The writer writes that he has a double standard for like great authors versus his parents, and he's like, oh, he judged his parents so harshly for his failings. He could never come to terms with their personal failings, but he would come to terms with his authors, with these authors that he really admired, its personal failings. And to me, this didn't really hit that hard, and it actually kind of like, it was like a little off in my brain, because it's like your parents, you have a personal relationship with your parents, so of course you're gonna take what they did harder, and you're not just looking at them and seeing like, oh, they're a person and they messed up. You're seeing like the way that they hurt you, and then if you have like issues with other choices that they've made, it's because their patterns of behavior are indicative of their willingness to hurt people. You know what I'm saying? You don't take problem with great writers because it's not personal. What they're writing is not your life, it's not personal to you. But you take issue with the lives of your parents because you see evidence of the fact that they're willing to hurt you in the behaviors that they had before you as well. So you might be like, oh, they made these bad decisions, but it's also like these bad decisions that they made led to my pain and led to my trauma. So of course you're gonna take more closer look at your parents' lives because it impacted you deeper. I feel like the author missed that. I feel like the author actually missed a lot of stuff. It reminds me of how, like, though we do oftentimes let authors and like artists off for being unkind people to their families just because of the great work that they did, and like it will sometimes bother me when people are mentioning how like successful and awesome my dad is. Like his extended family will be like, oh my gosh, your dad's so amazing, he's a great person. And I'm like, you should probably ask his kid about that. Like, you should probably not be telling his kid the type of person he is, because I'm the one who saw his underside. I'm the one who, he skipped half my childhood. He just wasn't there. Like, I'm the one who, even when he was there, 1/3 of the time he was telling me who I needed to be, telling me I wasn't enough. Like, and then 1/4 of the time we were doing great and having fun and laughing. But even then it was like almost nervous because I was on edge around him. And it's like, then I go and I talk to these people and they're like, your father's a great man. He's a great man, I'm gonna tell you that. And I'm like, you can tell me that, but I could tell you something else. I could tell you a lot of other things, actually. It feels entitled when people are like, oh, your mom's a great mom. And it's like, do you know though? For a fact? Were you there? Because I don't remember you being there. And that's just something I think about. So something that I think that is different about me and Alex, I think I'm just gonna start calling him Alex because that was the name he chose, is that I don't reject my need to need from other people regardless of the fact that those other people may have hurt me. And I don't reject myself for needing them. Like, in my childhood, I was a child, so of course I forgave and like reapproached parents. And of course even now I will forgive and reapproach parents because I need them, because I'm a human being. People need people. Like, that's a fact. And like, we will die without people, as evidenced by his ending. And I think even he realized that at the end. He was realizing like, oh, we actually do need one another. And like, the author of this book speculates that he was gonna go back to his parents. I see no evidence that that was true. I see no evidence. I think he was ready to move on. Personally, the letter said, or one of his last journal entries said like, I'm ready to go start a life, live in the country and do good for other people, and maybe find a mate. And what more could a man ask for? That is like ultimate happiness. But he didn't say anything about going back to his family. I think he had moved on. I think that he had alchemized whatever frustration he felt with society and realized it was like kind of a personal thing that he was dealing with and going through, and that what he actually wanted was to be with people. Not necessarily those people, not necessarily the people who made him want to run away to begin with. Yeah, and the author was like, maybe he'll go back to his family, he seemed ready to forgive. I don't think so. I don't personally think he was ready to forgive. Like, to run that far away and then just to forgive, maybe his sister, probably not his parents. And like, why would we put pressure on him to forgive his parents too? Why would we put pressure on anyone to forgive anyone? Something that this book reminded me of, just because it has so much to do with like domestic and non-domestic people and like being domesticated and the safety of being domesticated, is I had someone over and I was talking about how like I want to give my cat more toys because he seems like a little like too domestic, and like I feel like he has this wild side that I don't like let out enough, and I might even start leash training him. And she was like, oh, trust me, you give him a good life. He has a great life. And I was talking about how like I think I overfeed him because he's a little bit tubby. And I was saying like, maybe I need to feed him less or like exercise him more, and she was like, just let him live his like good domestic life. And I thought that was interesting. It's like, you really don't know what the cat wants except for when he expresses his wants, and you just kind of have to read like the body language of the cat to know like how domestic does the cat want to be. And it's the same for people. I was doing tarot readings on the street the other day, and I went inside the shop to ask like if I could do tarot readings outside of their shop on the street, and it is legal to set up shop on the street anywhere in LA. Like, you don't really need a permit, they don't really check. Technically I think you do, but they really don't check. There's really not much enforcement about it. And so they were like, yeah, go ahead, just as long as you don't look homeless, I don't think that they'll bother you. And it reminded me that like I have like a weird sense about like if I look homeless or not. I was like, I don't know, you tell me. Like, do I look homeless? Because I was literally homeless for a while. I was homeless for 6 months. And so like I felt like that whole time everybody could see that I was living in my car on me, and that they could smell it on me, and I don't think that they could. And I think that the only thing that was like a giveaway was that I was at the same place every single day, like using it like basically an extension of my home. Like, to me a cafe was like a living room. And I think that that's how they could sense it on me, that I maybe didn't have a place to go. And I think that this also comes from like in childhood, like I wasn't always like taken care of like hygienically or like food wise or emotionally or sleep wise. Like, there were not healthy patterns and routines that I could lean back on and follow. Like, I had the sense that like people could see that on me, and sometimes they could, and they could smell it on me when I came to school. Like, they could sense that I wasn't being taken care of. And it came from like an emotional place, a spiritual place, and then also like a physical place. I just felt like they could see it, I felt like they could sense it, and I felt like I was emotionally weakened by being verbally abused at home and physically abused at home. Like, I felt like homeless. I felt like I didn't have a home, and everybody could sense it. And to this day, I still feel like, even though I take better care of myself, I still can't always tell if people can tell that there's something wrong with me, you know? And that's CPTSD, that's the impact of being a traumatized person, is you really don't quite fit in anywhere. Because the culture of your home was not stable, you grew up different. And that like will last forever, I think. And you just have to find people who are like understanding and accepting of that. But I also like do know how to seem more like I'm taken care of. And like, especially in my teen years, I made an effort to appear more taken care of. And it also came around the time when we moved, and like there was like a fresh start in my parents' relationship. And so it felt like I was like, finally something is right. And I took that opportunity to like focus on developing healthier routines. And for a while my home was less chaotic, but it worked in cycles. Like, when you have mentally unwell parents, there are cycles of things being good and cycles of things being bad. And part of the way that I describe it is like there's a day and a night version of your life and of your childhood and of your household. And when things get bad, they're so shameful, like they're so shame-inducing. And when things are good, you look like a normal family. It's like, it is a facade, and you know deep down that it's a facade because you just don't feel like you were like emotionally fulfilled. You just don't feel emotionally fulfilled or supported, and when things get rough, you don't have anyone to go to. But at the same time, like, if you can look normal, then you have a higher chance of being able to fit in, and if you can fit in, then you have a higher chance of being able to get your needs met outside of the home. So it's like you're always pulled between these two worlds of like, I want to fit in, but it also doesn't feel true to me. Like, I feel like I'm lying, and the only way I can get my needs met is to lie about what's happening. And then on top of that, there's the pressure to keep secrets about what's happening in the family. So it's really just like a very complicated mess. And like, when I read this story, I can see he was struggling with the same exact things. And it's why when I meet someone who has gone through childhood trauma, I can sense it immediately in them as well. And I can also sense when someone like is good and is taken care of and like is stable and is kind. And I sometimes find that intimidating because it's like, I wonder if they can tell how much worse I am than them and how much less I deserve than them. And that's that part of me that believes that I deserve what I went through. And then there's another part of me that's like, I wonder like if I can like be good enough and normal enough to be this person's friend. Like I wonder if I can behave stably enough to be this person's friend. And I like so deeply desire to be this person's friend. And that enthusiasm can come off as a lot as well. And there are like a lot of patterns that emerge from being traumatized that if you're not traumatized, you don't understand our patterns of trauma and you think it's just someone being like a bad person. But it's not always that. And you really just kind of have to look at like someone's ethics and the rules that they follow and why to understand if they're a bad person or not. And it was apparent to everybody that Alex wasn't a bad person, but it was also apparent that he was running from something and that he had something to prove. And it was ultimately, I think, his trauma, and that he had to prove that he was strong enough to survive it, which is really sad. Something about like being a CPTSD haver is that when you couldn't rely on your caretakers, a lot of the times what you relied on was like your internal world, and what's inside of you is nature. And so you come to like understand and be one with nature as well, because you understand your nature and love your nature and like have that to rely on and fall back on. Sometimes I think that Alex, like when I was reading this book, I was like, I think Alex learned to trust his nature to an extreme, to the point that like structures that weren't natural, he didn't trust, because the only thing he had to rely on in childhood was his nature. And this book doesn't even talk about his childhood, but you can just tell. You can just tell there's something there. People in this book kept asking him, like, how could you just abandon your parents like that? And to me, it's just like, that's the most random question to ask someone who is so clearly not wanting to talk to his parents. Like, his parents are not your parents, and you can't project onto other people your parental relationship. Like, all kinds of people become parents. And I've never understood why people would say like, oh, it's important to have a relationship with your parents when they don't know your parents. They're projecting their values based off of their lived experience onto your life, and they're completely negating your lived experience. It has always seemed so unempathetic for people to say stuff like that, because it's like, you don't know the first thing about their family, and here you are putting pressure on them before you know anything about their situation to reconnect with their family. Like, serial killers have kids. That is a fact. Do you not understand that? Like, people have kids. All kinds of people. People you would not want in your life. So why would you want them to have them in their life? I don't get it. It's rude. And it's really actually dangerous. And I don't like it. And then on top of that, my automatic assumption is that all relationships are based on the premise that you want to be there. All relationships, regardless of who it is. It doesn't really matter who it is. Like, I want to show up, and you want to show up. That's called consent. That's what a relationship fundamentally should be. That's just ethical. That's just correct. And if I don't want to show up, I don't have any obligation to, and neither do you. And I would say like the only obligation that we have is like older people must take care of younger people, because younger people are less capable. And then the disabled and the elderly, we must take care of them as well. So when you've gone through traumatic circumstances in childhood, like, you become connected to your nature, and to like basically ensure that you survive, something kicks in, which is like a supreme joy at the fact of being alive at all, and an extreme gratitude for the fact that you're alive. And that's just something that kicks in when you are undergoing extreme trauma. And so you'll find these people who are like supremely excited and happy about the fact that they're alive at all, and it's almost embarrassing. You had like a pretty relatively like stable and normal childhood, then you'll meet these people and you don't understand why they're so manic. Like, why are they so grateful to be alive? Why are they so thankful that you're giving them food? Why are they so supremely thankful to you and loyal to you that you're being kind to them? And it's because like there is something in our nature that like when we survive near-death experiences, we become more grateful to be alive. It's just the contrast of knowing I could be dead, so oh my god, I'm not. Like, that just happens. I think like they talk about him having that personality trait, just like an extreme like overwhelming sense of being happy that he's alive and being grateful for small things like eating and small things like walking, like literally not even small, just like things like walking, things like this guy, just being in complete awe of the fact that he's alive. And it's like you don't get that unless you had to experience near-death experiences. And it's just crazy because like down to the very first year of his college experience being good and then the rest being like really difficult, like we have so much in common. Like, I went to college because I felt like I had to, not because I really truly wanted to do that with my life. And he went to college for the same reason. He felt a lot of pressure from his parents to go to college, down to like finding meaning in the potential of one day being a lawyer. Like, I was really, and like down to like being on the principals list in the first year. Like, I was so enthused about doing my best, even if it was something I was doing out of obligation. And then just like I couldn't sustain something that I didn't actually want to do. I wanted to go to law school. I wanted to be an environmental lawyer my first year. And like a part of me is still like, that would be cool. Another part of me is like, I'm not even sure. Like, I'm not even sure I believe in the legal system, so why would I go into something that I don't even know if I believe in? People always wondered like why he cut off contact with his sister, but I can say like I went 2 years without talking to anyone in my family, like maybe even 2.5 years, I think, with my siblings. And it was because I didn't feel like I could be honest with them about what I was doing because they were so deeply associated with my parents. I felt like my parents hurt me. My siblings talk to my parents as if they're friends with my parents. It felt almost like I can't trust these people. And that's probably exactly why he didn't talk to his sister too. He didn't feel like he could tell his sister anything without his sister telling his family. He worked at Domino's, I worked at Domino's. It's just like there's so many things that line up about our experiences. So I feel like something that was mentioned a lot in this book is how like his parents like worked a lot, like almost all the time when he was growing up. Like in his most formative years, like in his youngest years, his parents were never not working. And I feel like that must have related to why he felt like he must go out and enjoy life, and that like life is more precious than business and money. Like, he so deeply believed that because he felt so deeply ignored and neglected during the most formative, tactile, needy years of his life. It gives me to like remember like when I was young, I would be like, I literally wrote a song about this that I still have about my dad and like how he wasn't there and how I wished that he had worked less and we could have lived in a smaller house and we could have budgeted. Like, I wrote a song about that when I was a kid, and like I know that that's just like a childhood imagination, but the sentiment was there that I needed more attention, I needed more care, and I needed more nurturing, and I needed more loving, and I wasn't getting it, and I was willing to do without such a big house to have like a little more time. Like, time is more precious than space, as you can see from my tiny baby apartment. I literally live in 400 450 square feet right now, and I have everything I need. I'm very happy. He wanted to take his dog with him on this trip, and like his family ended up regretting not letting him because they knew for a fact that he wouldn't have put his dog in danger even if he put himself in danger. And that's really interesting because I remember like Oliver, when he first, which is my cat, when he's sitting on my lap right now, when he first entered into my life, I just felt like such a deep connection to him. Like I knew that he was meant for me, and I knew that like I was intended to take care of him. And I ended up like moving home pretty soon after. Like I kept dropping out of college because I was so depressed. Like I took leaves of absences in college, and it was crazy. Like I remember sitting in the therapist's room and just being like, this is the first time I've ever openly spoken about anything to a therapist because I've always been told not to tell people things. And I was like, I think I was shaking, but she wrote a medical leave of absence because I was so freaking depressed. I came and I like lived with Oliver, and Oliver was like my rock. Like he became my rock, and he became like, I realized like if he could live such a sweet, gentle life, then so could I. And it took me a while, but I did eventually just decide like if Oliver can't survive circumstances, then I shouldn't be expected to either. Yeah, it was kind of like I had to not have him when I lived in my car, and it was kind of like at the very end of it I decided like I deserve to have a place to live, and like also it's been 6 months without Oliver, and like I need him. And there's something about having like a little tiny living creature that makes you be more gentle on yourself, because you can experience yourself through them, and you can experience life vicariously through them, and like how sensitive they are and how needy they are and how little you want them to suffer. So why would you want yourself to suffer either? Why would you expect yourself to suffer either? And so they were talking about in this book how they really wished now that they had let him take his dog, because they knew that he would never have taken the chances he took with himself, with his dog. Like if he had had a dog, then he would have been more careful, and so they wish that they had let him take the dog. And I wish so too, because like he was clearly a kind-hearted person who would not have hurt dogs. He was like alone for many months, and then when he finally did go back into a town, like doing hiking in the woods or like on land, and when he did finally go back into town, someone took him in and like was like, you can sleep on my couch. And something he noted was like just like how much he loved hearing her breathe. He was this very solitary creature, and he got a lot from being alone, and he enjoyed being alone. He also like had missed the sound of another animal who was similar to him breathing. I think we forget how human we are and how much we need to hear each other, and how much we need to like feel each other there, and how something as simple as like sleeping on someone's couch and hearing their breathing can be like so comforting. And sometimes we just need that. We just need to know that we're not the only one alive. The author of the story talks about how he went on his own adventure when he was young. That was a near-death experience. And he's talking about how when you're alone, the highs are higher and the lows are lower because you don't have a society to share it with or to discuss it with, and how like having someone to share an experience with kind of puts it into context and like makes it a little bit more distant, because at the very least you have each other. And this reminded me of like when I was a kid and I felt alone. I remember making imaginary friends with whom to discuss life with. To this day, I still do that. Like my journals are mostly conversations with like an imaginary friend. 2 people is a society. 2 people have culture. 1 person, the highs are high and the lows are low. The only axis you have is up and down. 2 people, you start to have some perspective. You start to have some like conversation. You start to have different ideas, and it gives you like a more well-rounded feeling. It's just so sharp to be alone sometimes, especially when you're going through hard things, which can be good for like self-discovery, but it's not a life, you know? It's not a life. So something that he seems to be grappling with is that his dad had an affair with his mom, and then there was like some messy like back and forth in betweening where he was going back to his old girl and then his new girl, and then finally he ended up settling with his mom. But part of me wonders, and this is completely speculation because I don't even know him and I haven't even read his sister's book, which will give me more insight into like his personal life and his personal thoughts. But part of me wonders if he kind of feels like maybe he shouldn't have even existed because he was the result of cheating and dishonesty. Something else is like, it's kind of fucked up that like after death, they don't even consider what someone might want done with their journals, and they just like read them and then like exploit them and like put them out for the public to read. It's like, that person's dead so we can read their journal entries. And I've seen this in interviews with celebrities too, where they're like, oh, we found your journal, haha, let's read it. And I just don't understand, like, is there not like an understood like societal norm that you don't read people's journals and that journals are a private place? Because personally, I want my journals to be read after I'm dead. I want them to be published, and I'm writing that in my will. That's what I want. I want them to be archived. But for someone who didn't specify what they want, I feel like it's a violation of their privacy to read their journals for the whole world to hear. Especially someone who died in such a gruesome way. It's like, I know you're curious, but like, respect the dead. Something about this book is like, I talked about like, there's an energy to this book, and it's like I can feel that sadness and like overwhelm and confusion and wanting to find answers like is what runs his life. It's like those are the feelings I got as I was reading about his choices. Just like distrust, sadness, trauma, overwhelm. That was the prevailing feelings that he was feeling. Overwhelm, and then like also just like amazement. I wrote, he's so disappointed in humanity yet still approaches it openly, like on an individual to individual basis. Completely aside from like all of this, and like with complete respect to him as a human being, and like understanding that his actions didn't come from a logical place, they came from an emotional place, there is like a certain respect that you have to have for land, and there's like a certain respect for history that you have to have as well. That there is a reason why we're not undomesticated anymore, and there's a reason why society exists, and that we continue to choose society over not society, or that the vast majority of people do. And it's because it prevents suffering. And you have to have a little bit of respect for the people who have come before you, made maps of land so that you can know where to go and where not to go. There's knowledge about the land that exists, and it's important to learn it before you try to interact with it on such an intimate and like risk-taking level. And it's almost like, I feel like if only we could have the chance to prepare before life, because I feel like he might have blamed himself for being ill-prepared for his childhood as well. And that is why he felt like he had to survive ill-prepared, is because that's what he'd always been doing. He'd always been just going off of instinct, and that led to his survival, and so he continued to go off of instinct, hoping it would lead to survival. So there was like a lot of misrepresentation of this person that happened in the media, and one of them was that he killed a moose and wrote in his journal that it was a moose, and they said like, no, that's not a moose, that's a caribou. He needed to know what the fuck he was talking about, which is so disrespectful, like, to someone who's died in such a horrible way. I just don't want to associate with someone who's suffering so badly and who they don't understand. But when this author went and visited the site, it was a moose, and that was misrepresented. And people just want to be so dismissive that for some reason they're willing to like lie and make assumptions that aren't true about another human being before they're willing to like actually investigate what happened, or to admit that they don't really understand why something happened. So he didn't know how to preserve a moose, and he felt really bad about killing a moose to kill it and not knowing how to preserve it. Apparently there was knowledge that you should cut it into thin slices and let it dry in the sun, but he was trying to smoke it, and it ended up like all the maggots got to it and were eating it first. is just really a horrible visual to have. Like, he was out there like so hungry, and he didn't even know how to preserve his food. And he also was like guilty at having actually killed something so large and beautiful. One of the hardest parts about this book is that I really do feel like at the end he was like on a bright path. If he had been able to get back to society, he had come to the conclusion that it was better to be with people and that happiness was only real when shared with people. I feel like he was gonna do good in the world, and that, it does make me sad. Oh, freaking, look at this synchronicity. The moose. Being misunderstood. Wow. Being misrepresented by people who don't understand you. And people saying things that aren't true because, wow, dang. What I said is actually kind of like true to my life as well. When someone who's like super restless and like has things that they need to work through is trapped in like an environment that isn't nurturing their soul, they start to make plans that are huge, and like in a way they start to manifest a future that is like a counterweight to their current reality because they're suffering so badly. And then they feel like they have a duty to their past self who was trapped in a stagnant environment to go out and like fulfill the dream that they had when they were in that environment. I speak from personal experience as well. Like, I owe myself success because past me felt like she was trapped in such a dull place. I feel that. A lot of times with trauma, if you can't express something verbally, then you end up expressing it through your actions. And his actions was like, he just wanted to get away from his family. He just was scared, he wanted to get away. And that's what he was trying to say, was that he wanted to be free and he didn't want to have to rely on these people. He felt so trapped in this family with these people. He had to express that in like a really dramatic way because he couldn't say it. And he felt it so strongly. So this is like kind of a particular thing. If you don't want to go to college, then don't go. And if you don't know what you want to do with your life, don't spend 4 years going to college. People above you will use the logic that like it's just 4 years and you're young and you'll regret it when you're older to try to get you to go. But the truth is, like, just 4 years? Do you know how much changes in 4 years, especially when you're young? You're creating the life that you'll live for the rest of your life when you're young. Why would you waste 4 young years? And I think old people who regret their lives, they try to control young people into doing what they did so that they feel better about having done what they did. But like, it's always a red flag if someone's trying to get you to do something you don't want to do. You're just gonna end up resenting them and probably not doing anything in your life that has to do with whatever you got your degree in because it wasn't your choice to begin with and you know what's right for you and it's your path that you should be following because your path is gonna take you where you want to go and you're gonna go where you want to go because that's what people do. But basically just 4 years of life is way too much time to spend doing something that someone else wants you to do. Way too much life. Like, you could die in the first or second year. That could be the rest of your entire life. You don't know. And my final point is, human nature has a spirit that fights for itself to exist, and it wants to see itself expressed on Earth. And if someone is repressing like you from expressing your true nature, whether that be by like hurting you or like forcing you to make decisions you don't want to make, then when you do finally get the chance, you will like counteract that. You will have to reach equilibrium in some way. He died doing what he wanted to do, and the fact that their story is now being told and it shines so much light on these people who pressured him into a life he didn't want, I think that that's like an important lesson. Stories must be told. Stories must be told. And I believe that in my own life as well. Thank you so much for watching, and have a beautiful day. And if you read this book, which I hope you do, I hope you enjoy it as well. And I hope you get some different things than I got from it because you're a different person than I am.